Okay, hello and welcome to week 4. Today we're going to talk about the development of a manual for your program in a little bit more detail than we covered in class during our weekend intensive. And then I'll also use a specific curriculum called the Incredible Years Parenting Program that provides kind of an example of what one parenting training program can look like. Obviously, I also had Everyday Parenting out as a resource for you over the weekend, and some of you are choosing to use that as a guide or template for your curricula as well, for your manual projects, and that's also fine. So I'm just giving you more resources and more examples to use if you are doing a parent training focused workshop. Incredible Years also has variations for children and for teachers as well, for those of you that are interested. And one of the readings for this week is to look through, at least skim parts of it, the Incredible Years PDF file that I have on Obiverse for this week. So that's also a resource that's available to you and has more detail about it. So, as for creating the group manual, some initial decisions for your group that you may have already done is deciding on the purpose for the group, deciding on a target audience, and deciding on the goals and the expected outcomes for the group. And then some specific structural and environmental factors that you're going to need to consider in planning the group, thinking about the number of sessions, the length of the sessions, and the frequency of the sessions. So how many times is it going to be? 5 sessions, 6, 7? Are they going to be hour-long sessions, hour and a half, maybe just 30 minutes? And then how many times a week are they going to be happening, or is it bi-weekly? Specify if that's every other week or twice a week, because that can be both. And then the physical meeting space, where will you be meeting, and any other concerns that might impact the group. So the first phase in creating this group manual is the information gathering stage. You're going to want to research and describe what the problem is that you are addressing and or preventing. So having that key overarching topic statement or question, problem statement that is helping guide how you design your interventions and the structure of your meetings. And so what problem are you addressing? In describing that problem, some things to consider, much like in the APA writing class, you want to describe the prevalence and negative outcomes that are associated with the problem for the particular population you're working with. You want to be considering the ecological model, so looking across levels of how this problem impacts a population or an individual that belongs to a community you want to work with. Risks and protective factors for the issue, and also your own conceptual framework. So again, like we've talked about, your main theoretical orientation is going to contribute to how you understand the issue. And so it's important to understand what your own perspective is so that you can explain it and describe it for someone else that doesn't have your perspective. And so you want to be able to connect the risk and protective factors within the ecological model to what the expected outcome is. And also be clear, and I understand that the 3 of you in each group may not have the same theoretical orientations, and you might. And so you're probably mostly going to be working with an integrated approach. And so being clear in thinking about how the different orientations that you're drawing from are going to be affecting the way that you conceptualize these things. And having those conversations in your group will be important. So also in phase 1, you also want to research the solution for the issue. So what does the literature say about prevention and intervention for the issue you're addressing? And then what are the key program components that are found in effective curricula or curriculum for this issue? So things that I've covered in class, but just restating them just to make it really clear and stress the importance of these pieces in creating the manual. And the second phase will be decisions about your proposed group. So with the data from the information gathering phase, you want to clarify the purpose of the group, who the target audience is, what the goals are, and the proximal and distal outcomes. And again, remembering that proximal are the short-term outcomes that you see, like the change happening during and immediately after the manual, the group curriculum is over. And then distal is looking long term, like what will the effects be a year after the group ends? What will the effects be over time? So taking that developmental approach, that's that chronosystem aspect to the ecological model in how a person, a member of your group, how their ecological model may change over time as a reaction to your group. And then also looking at those specific environmental and structural factors. So again, the ecological model will help with that. So then preparing and revising your plans. After doing the research and putting together your plan, you want to revise it. So don't just sit with the first rough draft idea that you have. Be critically thinking about really what are the outcomes going to be? Is this the best version of this manual that I can make? And as you continue gathering more and more information, you're going to have maybe some decisions to make at the end of your information gathering stage that you want to revise what you might have initially thought would have been a good idea. Because maybe you found some research literature that supports tweaking something a certain way, and that would make it more effective, or that would make it be more evidence-based than it might otherwise have been. So not being afraid to revise things. Questions to update and clarify after the lit review. So things to think about. What part of the problem are you addressing? What are the short-term and long-term outcomes you wish to impact the participants in your group? And thinking about the risk and protective factors that you're addressing, and the specific goals for this group, and how do they match up with the risk and protective factors. So really making sure everything is connected and linked and they fit together. And one thing that will help you do that is to develop the outcome flow chart. And there are examples of this in the example manuals in the week 2 module of Obiverse. And so the outcome flow chart is really going to help you connect what the curriculum goals are, what are the broad components, what are the risk and protective factors you're addressing, and what are the outcomes, both short-term and long-term, in other words, proximal and distal. Third phase is actually planning the curriculum. So after you've done that lit review and after you've revised, you want to develop specific components of your curriculum. If you get too detailed too soon, it might end up being more work for you than if you go in this order. So it's in this order for a reason. So you want to revisit effective components noted by the lit review and then incorporate that into your curriculum. So you want to be asking yourself, how do they connect with risk and protective factors and theoretical conceptualization of the issue you're targeting? Does it fit with the model you're working under? Does this specific intervention that I see in the literature and has been noted as effective, does it match up with what I'm trying to do with my curriculum? And then how do they match up with the literature regarding the solution? So one example, just to provide an overview, is the Incredible Years series, and this is a group manual that has different variations for the teacher, for the child, and for the parent in terms of training programs. It's developed by Webster Stratton in 1984, and it's very widely used, very widely regarded. So it's designed to promote emotional and social competence and prevent, reduce, and treat aggression and emotional problems in children ages 0 to 12 years old. And I imagine that I can't say this for sure, but I imagine that they also have different versions based on developmental level. So it has a lot of iterations of the same series that's tailored and adapted to the particular audience, and even within children, the particular developmental level. So things that you want to be thinking about as you make your interventions. Is it developmentally appropriate? So the structure of it, the parent programs, I'm going to focus more on the parent programs just throughout this lecture for the examples. So the parent programs are designed as group discussions with 12 to 14 parents per group and one group leader. And so in thinking about how big you want your groups to be and why. And the group format features a sense of community support, so the parents can support each other. That reduces isolation, and that also normalizes parents' experiences and situations, because this might be the first place where they can come and say, like, hey, I'm really struggling with this, and maybe I feel a little ashamed, or like I'm not good enough because I'm struggling. And there are very likely other parents in that group that can say, you know what, actually that's something I struggle with too. And that can be very normalizing and helpful for parents to hear. So the content covered in each session needs to be paced according to each parent group's particular needs for discussion and content, level of participation, and prior familiarity with the parenting concepts. And so even though they might have this very structured content to cover in each session, the group facilitator needs to be experienced enough to be able to tailor the pace of the group, how much time they spend explaining each concept, how much time they spend practicing each concept based on the individual needs within the group. And so that's a lot of tracking in session, and that's a lot of work for a group facilitator to do. And so the structure in general is 8 to 12 vignettes, so kind of like short sample stories covered in each 2-hour session. So they're 2-hour sessions. And each content area has at least 2 sessions focused to it. So when you think about that, session 1 and 2 might cover one particular concept. Session 3 and 4 will then be devoted to another particular concept that you're teaching to the parents or skill. And at least half of a particular topic is covered in one session since it spans 2. And then there's also a home practice component that's given out with guidelines for an activity for parents to go home and practice what they learned. So also something to think about for your own group is handing out homework and guidelines for those things. And then the next session in that 2-session pair is then used for troubleshooting and to show remaining vignettes on that topic as a review. So after parents have time to go home and practice their skills, they can come back to the second session devoted to that topic and then say, okay, what went well and what maybe didn't go as planned, and how can we support the parents in developing that skill and troubleshoot with them. So here's an example. Main content 1 this is like the first 4 main content areas that are covered in the curriculum for parent training. So the first one is strengthening social and emotional regulation. The second one, so that would be 2 sessions. The second one would be praise and rewards to encourage cooperative behavior. That would be another 2 sessions. And then effective limit setting. That's another 2 sessions. And then handling misbehavior. That's another 2 sessions. And that right there would be 8 sessions. And so getting a bit more detailed with each one. So for main content 1, strengthening social and emotional regulation, some subtopics are how to play with your child, how to help your child learn, and how to do social and emotional coaching for your child. So some of what Graham, our guest lecturer, was giving examples of in doing that parallel process and like playing with your kid, sportscasting what they're doing, just making observations, and then how to also give that feedback of, it looks like you're having an emotional reaction. What's going on? Where do you feel that? And being able to identify that emotion with that child. And that would be social and emotional coaching. Main content, did not mean to jump. Main content 2, praise and reward to encourage cooperative behavior. And so there you would be talking about praise. So we want to do specific praise and praise for effort and tangible rewards. So how can we provide incentives and rewards for positive behavior that we want our child to do more of in effective ways? The third content area is effective limit setting, and within that you have establishing routines and household rules, and effective limit setting and follow through. That's, I will say right off the bat, is one of the most challenging things to work with, because it's a common issue with parents and following through when they set limits with children. And then the main content 4 is handling misbehavior. So, talking about positive discipline, ignoring inappropriate behavior, use of timeouts, other consequences, and teaching children to problem solve. And so, we talked about in our weekend class how to adapt curricula for different populations and different cultural groups. And so, for some parents might come in not really ever having used timeout, and it's not really a part of parenting culture to use timeout. And so, how we incorporate that and teach that might look different based on the parent's cultural background. And so, it's just important to consider. Session planning. So, you want to have for each session an objective, a tentative schedule, so a routine and sequence of activities. You want a list of needed materials, and you want an outline and or full text for the material presented for the group facilitators to follow along. And then also you may want to have something, an outline to pass out to your group members if that seems like that would be helpful for the group members to have something and to have a bit more structure and be able to follow along. You want to consider what the most effective instructional strategies are going to be for your particular group, whether it's lecture-based, whether it's discussion-based, whether you're watching videos or doing role plays or working in pairs to troubleshoot things. There's a lot of strategies, and what you use and the combination of what you use is going to vary. You want to consider cultural diversity of the participants and adapt accordingly. And you do that via using collaborative problem solving. And it's a collaborative process, really bringing in the participants to consider them as experts and as collaborators in how you are adapting the structure for them in a way that's going to be helpful for them. So an example handout might be just a piece of paper that you hand out that says this on it. So it says the agenda, welcome, review of the ground rules and agenda, report on home activities, the topic of the day, and there you would have the topic of the day listed, review home activities, parent evaluation of group and leader, so you're doing like live feedback, and then have some sort of closing. And the breakdown of sessions for this particular Incredible Years program. 60% of each session, excuse me for the typos, is group discussion, problem solving, and support. 25% is instructional modeling, so that's 25 to 30 minutes of videotape. And 15% is didactic teaching. So you can see even within each session, the combination of different instructional activities varies. So they have group discussion, support, they have instructional modeling with the use of video as models of how to implement these strategies and skills that they're learning each week. And then also some didactic kind of lecture-based teaching. And that's actually only 15%. So the reason they use videotape modeling is because it's more accessible for parents than didactic teaching. Being able to see a parent-child dynamic visually and hear that is often more effective than just talking about it hypothetically as a group facilitator. It encourages parent participation and discussion. The negative examples that you show via video will dispel the worry of not being the perfect parent, because often you'll throw, I don't like the word negative example, but you'll throw a not ideal scenario up, and parents will see that, and it'll be something that'll be super common, and you can normalize that as you watch it for the parents. After each vignette, the leader stops the tape and asks open-ended questions about the scenes. And as we know from micro skills, open-ended questions also stimulate discussion and conversation, which is what we want. And then parents react and discuss the episodes and develop alternative responses to the incidents portrayed. So after watching an example that doesn't really go so well of an interaction between a parent and a child, you can talk about as a group, okay, what didn't go so well? Why didn't that work? What could we do instead? What might you try? And then get into the skill that you want to teach. There's also weekly homework activities, and the reason for that is it helps transfer learning to real life at home. So that helps make that connection and that bridge between what we talk about in practice and session and then what you're actually doing at home. Because it's really easy to go back home and just let everything go out of your brain and go back to your own patterns and dynamics and get kind of pulled right back into all of those things and forget about what you learned. So, I mean, that's something when we talk about like context specific learning, it's easy to be able to retrieve information that we learned when we're in the same space in which we learned it. But once we change spaces, like even physical spaces, when we're at home, it can actually be harder to be able to remember and retrieve the information that you learned in a different place, like in the group setting. So these homework activities help strengthen your ability to retrieve and use the information that you learned in session at home. And then there's also role play and rehearsal. So it's commonly used in skill-based psychoeducational groups, and they typically do about 4 role plays per session, which may seem like a lot, but keeping them short also takes some of the pressure off. And it promotes problem solving with the group, and it helps parents anticipate and problem solve situations. So when they get that like live feedback and response to an intervention that they try out or a skill that they're learning for the first time, they can also see, okay, like how did it feel to do that and get some practice doing something new. Because the first few times you try something new, it's not going to be as smooth as it might be after a few times of practice. Some other aspects of this curriculum are the facilitator phone calls, and so that the leader calls parents every 2 weeks to check in and troubleshoot, so they can have a phone conversation about how things are going, and that's some individual time with the group facilitator for each parent. It helps build rapport between the parents and the group facilitator to get that individual time. And it also caters to different comfort levels in larger groups versus one-on-one interactions. You might have some parents that don't feel comfortable talking in large group settings and are way more comfortable talking one-on-one. And so being able to do a combination of group conversations and one-on-one conversations is helpful to just cater to different learning styles and comfort levels. They also do buddy calls, so parents are assigned parent buddies in their groups, and they're asked to call each other during the week to talk about progress and challenges. This is initially pretty difficult for the parents to do. It can feel kind of awkward to call someone they don't really know that well about how things are going. But over time, parents typically end up really enjoying the phone calls. And if a session is missed by a parent, the buddy will call to check in and give them a quick overview of the material they missed. So that also kind of helps with accountability so that people are showing up, and even if they don't, there's still this connection to the group of we're taking care of you, we're making sure you're still engaged, make sure to come back. So for your group, things you want to consider, a routine for the structure of each session. So having some consistency across session of how you structure each session. You also want to consider the most effective instructional strategies for your topics. Consider cultural differences in the group and how you might adapt accordingly, using that collaborative process, bringing the parents into that process. And then also think about frequency, duration, meeting space, and then also think about exosystemic factors like, are you going to provide childcare so that parents can come if, your groups are in the evening and parents can't afford childcare or don't have an older sibling to watch the younger one so they can come to the meeting. And then also think about, is your meeting space accessible via public transportation? Because not all parents may have access to cars and be able to make it to your space where you're meeting. And then things to think about in selecting activities. You want to brainstorm activities and exercises that use a variety of theoretical approaches. So it's good that you're in groups, and it's great if you three in each group have different theoretical approaches, just so long as you're clear in connecting problem, intervention, outcome. Assess the intensity and activity for each group and each group member. So thinking about, okay, how heavy is each group going to be? How demanding is each activity we're practicing? And you want to try and vary that. Will it evoke anxiety, self-awareness, a focus on feelings, a focus on right here, right now, the present moment? And that'll be informed by your theoretical orientation. So things to consider. At the beginning stage, those first few sessions, you want to move more slowly. So it's less intense, a bit less intimate, and less personal because we're in that like forming, warming stage. People are still kind of feeling each other out. And you need to build that rapport and that trust in order to be able to increase the vulnerability in the group and the risks that they take in role plays and things like that. In the middle stage, there can be more risk, it can be more challenging because there's more trust between the group members and between the group members and the facilitator. So you can up the ante a bit. Then the ending, you want to bring it back down. So it's like a nice wave where it goes up into the middle and then it comes back down. So it's lower intensity. You let go of the emotional involvement in the group in order to prepare them for the adjourning or the morning phase. And you reflect on group participation and skills learned and progress made. You want to highlight a lot of things for the group members, and you want to maybe facilitate the group members being able to do that for each other towards the end so that it can be this nice closing and a positive experience, as well as, it might be sad, but really highlighting change and progress. So looking ahead for this week, you want to look over the Incredible Years manual. I want to be very clear about this. I do not expect you to read it all. It's a very long PDF. I provide it to you to have as a resource in case you want to incorporate some aspects of that manual into your curriculum, or at the very least, to provide you with another model. And should you decide to use it or not is completely up to you and based on the kind of a manual that you want to implement with your group. So look over it. It could be really helpful to just skim it at the very least, but do not read it all unless you're very interested and or planning to use it for your group. And that's it. That's all I have for this week. So thanks and hope you enjoy the rest of the material.